along to Parliament House, and we're here today to show you the art that's hanging here. And my name's Robert Morgan, and this piece here is called Gympie Gold, and it contains the pyrographic portraits of James Nash and Andrew Fisher. James Nash, the first gold miner in Queensland, and Andrew Fisher, of course, the Prime Minister.
Okay.
Yeah. And this piece is called Australian Colonial. It's got a couple of characters from Queensland's history in there and Australian history. We've got George Ferguson Bowen, the first Governor of Queensland, and of course Lachlan Macquarie, who was one of the great people in New South Wales. We go on to this one called the book Beyond the Black Stump. We've got Major Mitchell, they're named a cockatoo after him, and we've got John Oxley and George Evans, some of the early explorers that we had here in Australia. A couple of legends in Australian history. I reckon the main two legends that we've got here in Australia. Don Bradman, he made 452 not out in a game in the 30s, and we got Slim Dusty, just the most incredible guy with 100 albums, and they're burned into the wood, and that's the hollow log, the blue gum hollow log. All right. That was a shearer's strike in Barcaldine in central Queensland, and in that shearer's strike a lot of the Australians actually got their rights from that. And now as we go on here now in today's age, the new industrial laws has taken a lot of those rights away, and a lot of workers are coming in. This is not political, but it's some history that tells us that this is who we really are. And that's the Tree of Knowledge, and that's Bob Hawke and Darcy Wentworth. Okay. Yes, now we have a piece by Ian Carter from Redcliffe, the Wood Turners Club, and of course this is the blacksmith shop, which is a part of our work and history here in Australia as well, like the Tree of Knowledge. And you can see all these pieces in the blacksmith shop here, and this is how we started. And of course Ian's done a lot of hours work on this. It's all made out of silky oak, and I really love this piece. It's one of my favourites, and I'm so happy that Ian has lent it to me here to have in Parliament House, and thanks a lot, Ian. Welcome along to the first settlement, one of the first settlements in Australia. Thanks to Mike for filming me here today. It's good to see him smiling away, and he's certainly working that camera. The first settlement was, of course, this one's got George Arthur, John MacArthur and Philip Gidley King. And the first settlement in Queensland was at Redcliffe, and Redcliffe are one of my sponsors, and I want to thank them very much, because the other night I forgot my speech, and we first of all, we got this up here so at least Redcliffe can be remembered, and Moreton Bay and all that, and of course, what's his name? Close, am I?
I'll probably just...
This one here is called Desert Rose. It's a beautiful yellow colour background, and the background paper is called a marmor. And it all happened in 1838 to 1872 here. These three different explorers, Strzelecki, who found Mount Kosciuszko, and of course Giles, Ernest Giles, went around Australia and twice around Australia by himself with a few camels and a bit of a pack horse here and there. And our mate Eyre was Edwin John Eyre was the guy that discovered the Nullarbor Plain and went all the way across to Perth. The land is a tribute to Hamilton Hume and William Hobble, the two blokes that actually they found their way all the way from Sydney all the way to Melbourne, and there's stories in this picture that that tell that part of the story, and some of the plants that they have actually discovered on the way and saw. And they're two brave explorers that did that. It was a lot of miles to do. Go over here to the Overland Telegraph. Now this is the first time we got hooked up with the world for communications, and it went from South Australia all the way through to Darwin. And Captain Charles Sturt was the first explorer that went up there, and of course John McDougall Stewart was the one that got all the way through and opened up that country all the way from Adelaide up to Darwin. Now we have mountain men, the Blue Mountains, and across the Great Divide. We've got Blaxland, Lawson and Wentworth, and they're credited with going across the Great Divide from Sydney, and in 1813 they discovered the Blue Mountains, and they actually crossed the Blue Mountains and went out in that country and opened up all the sheep farms for all the settlers that went out to Bathurst and places like that. Now here we've got uncharted coast. So Australia was explored by the Dutch and the Portuguese before Captain Cook actually came here, but Cook was the first one to actually chart it, and of course he had Joseph Banks, a botanist from England, and of course those two in the Endeavour, the ship the Endeavour, travelled all the way up the east coast of Australia, and they're credited with the discovery of Australia. So it made it easier for the first fleet to come here, and of course Captain Cook finished up on a couple of voyages. He went to Hawaii, and he was speared by the natives and killed in Hawaii on his way back to England. Now we come to a couple of guys, Robert O'Hara Burke and William John Wills. Robert O'Hara Burke was an Irishman, and William John Wills was an Englishman. And these are a couple of the real heroes of Australia. They took off out there, and they made a path all the way to from the south of Australia to the north of Australia, from a place called Menindee, where they had their camp, and they had quite a few tribulations and trials as they went through those areas with the natives, and they had to eat a plant called nardoo that the Aboriginals introduced to them, and the nardoo was used to, in a white man's stomach, it would belt up and cause belching and terrible things, and the white man couldn't digest it. Of course, so the Aboriginals could. They were used to it. Maybe they just cooked it. Now this is a big turning point in Australia's history. The miners were out in force in Victoria, in a place called Ballarat and Bendigo, and of course at Baker's Hill the miners, they had a couple of governors of Victoria before Australia actually became a country, and two of the governors, there was Charles Hotham, and there was another one before him. His name escapes me, but he was very hard to get along with the miners, and they'd send the police out, and the police would go out and get some money off the miners for their miners' rights, and they doubled the cost of it, and they trebled the cost of it, and the miners revolted. And it was the first time Australia actually come to very close to having a civil war, very close. And of course Peter Lalor he was the leader of the miners, the man on the right there, and the other governor was the governor of Victoria on the left. But as they took them and they went through after the Battle of the Eureka Stockade, the Victorian government actually gave them all pardons and reduced the miners' right to the cost of what it really should have been. The Investigator, and the Investigator was the name of the ship of George Bass and Matthew Flinders. And Matthew Flinders was an excellent explorer, and he actually circumnavigated Australia, I think probably once or twice, at least once, and he mapped the whole area, and even today those maps are so accurate that it was just unbelievable that two blokes like this. So there's a lot of places in Australia called Flinders, and he went into Moreton Bay and he landed at a place called Redcliffe, and that was at Woody Point. And of course George Bass was with him, and they took a native called Bongaree or Bungaree with them, and the native actually made friends with all the Aboriginals for these explorers, and negotiated with the Aboriginals when the whites met the blacks. And I'll show you his picture of him very soon coming up. This is called the First Fleet, and these characters here, John Hunter and Arthur Phillip. Of course, Arthur Phillip was the first governor of Australia, and John Hunter was the captain of the First Fleet. And this is where they were looking for a convict dump. The English were looking for a convict dump to actually come here to Australia. And of course, a lot of the people, you know, were convicted of stealing loaves of bread, and they got 7 years with hard labour and transported to Australia. And the transportation ships started after the First Fleet, and they came for 30 years after 1788, and they just kept coming. And Arthur Phillip landed at, and John Hunter landed at Botany Bay in Sydney, and of course the rest is Australian history. That's how we became a nation, from these gentlemen here. This is the First Fleet as well, and there's a couple of characters here who I know bits of stories of. Collins was the first, after the first governor, I think he was the, now it escapes me now, but of course William Bligh was noted for the rum trade and what he did with the rum in Australia, and of course this is just a history again of these two lads, and I'm just not quite sure, it escapes me now, so I'll learn up on that one. Here we are, we're still in Queensland Parliament, and of course now we've got this piece called Wanted, and we have Edward Kelly, the Irishman, and Judge Redmond Barry. Ned Kelly was a famous bushranger in Australian history, and of course he was well liked. He's a folk hero in Australia, and of course he was plenty bad man sometimes too, and he went out, and he was a bit like Robin Hood though. He seemed to rob the rich and give to the poor, and Judge Redmond was assigned to, when they caught him after all the stories and that what happened to him, and the gang, which you'll see in a minute, of course Ned was tried and sent to the gallows in Australia, and but he was able to change a lot of the thinking, the social structure of the history from the letters he wrote to our Australian history. And of course the Judge Redmond Barry, he after he tried him, he said, well, you're going to the gallows, and Ned said, well, I'll see you there. And it just happens that Judge Redmond died 11 days after Ned was sent to the gallows. Now we have The Last Stand, and it's the same in the history of Australia, burned into timber and blue gum. Each one of these hollow logs actually has an opal here at 5 o'clock, and our lighting, once we get our lighting going a bit, this was all a bit rushed this time round, the opals will give out some beautiful colour. And what, you know, it's about Daniel Kelly, Joseph Byrne and Stephen Hart, who were Ned Kellys, and of course they were outlaws in Australia, and they used to party in Canindra, and they'd steal horses, and they'd go on and they held up a train, and they took a lot of money around the Victorian areas next to the New South Wales border. And of course they were in a shootout in Victoria in the town, and they took over a hotel, and the hotel was burnt down, and I think Ned was the only one, or maybe one more got out of it, but the other two were burnt to death. And of course Daniel Kelly, the one in the middle here, some say that he actually lived on, and he went up to Ipswich and lived there happily after, that he did get out of the fire. But that's all history and no one really knows. Waltzing Matilda, we all know that. It's our unofficial national anthem, and it was written, or actually recorded. It's an old song, and there's lots of argument that it came from Germany and Ireland or England and parts of Europe, and then they also, and so Banjo Patterson got together at a station up in North Queensland near Winton. And he got together with a woman up there, and they had the tune, and Banjo wrote some words, and they got together and they put the words together, and of course that's what we got. We got Waltzing Matilda. And Banjo was famous. He was a solicitor in the old days. He used to travel around out west, and of course we all know about the man from Snowy River. That's the story of Banjo Patterson. And the fellow on the right is Henry Lawson, and he was a great poet in Australia and told a lot of stories, and he's just got verse after verse and lots of books that are so many that there are too many to actually mention. Now these three gentlemen here are the fathers of Federation. I've got them in a different poster. I've got other pieces that actually explain what Federation is. And they had a great big meeting in a huge hall in Melbourne, and figured out in 1901 how all the states would federate, or Australia would federate and come together and form our nation. And we have Henry Parkes. He was from Tenterfield and did a lot of stuff around Tenterfield, and the other two gentlemen was the first here of Australia, Edmund Barton, and our friend here whose name escapes me at the moment, Alfred Deakin, was a top solicitor, and of course he was part, and these three people and many more men got together and did that for Australia and made us into and gave us our nationhood. Here's another one of Burke and Wills. It's got a square frame, and this timber's black wattle, what we call, and the stories in here is really what happened to them, and they actually made a dash from south to north, from an Indy, and they were real heroes, these guys. Now we've got Bass and Flinders again. And of course here's Bongaree, the gentleman that went around Australia with Bass and Flinders, and he made peace with all the Aboriginals for the white man as we were discovering this land. And Bongaree of course is wearing the hat, and he's got a gold chain on too, which may have been his tag from the British, but I love the hat. It's my favourite. That hat is just, he looks like the captain, whereas the white guys they've got the uniforms on and everything, but he was great, Bongaree. A bit more flavour in it. It's called Fire and Time. It's got some Aboriginal dot paintings on the over the top, and this is a real Aboriginal head. It's an impasto background. This head here is made of red cedar, and the impasto background was done by another artist called Greg Cummins, and this head, we actually got a real Aboriginal to pose for us, and we put a plaster head on him, but he kept moving, so we told him if he didn't stop moving, we'd hit him on the head with a hammer. So he stopped, and we got the cast, and then we carved the red cedar head from there. And now we have some opals in here that's in the shape of the Southern Cross, and when the light plays on them, it's a really beautiful piece, and it's called Fire and Time, and it's about our heritage and our history, the way the Aboriginals played a part in Australian history. This piece was lent to me by Greg Shepherd, who's a great artist, and he's worked for Queen Elizabeth II, the Queen of England, and He's a very, very incredible man, this man, and the bottom is an Aboriginal, and it's foundry cast real bronze, and the wedge is aluminium, and it's got a fiberglass top. And I'll just read a little bit to you, and that way you can see a bit of this history of this man, this brilliant man. The statement is, the Aboriginal head symbolises the indigenous spirit not yet touched by European settlement. He stands silent in the interior, but something not yet seen makes him turn and gaze into the distance. Something is coming, but he knows not what. In contrast, the European head is dominant and modern. He has sunglasses and zinc cream to protect his white skin from the alien environment. He has developed technologies, sophisticated social structures to sustain him in this land so far away. The aluminium wedge symbolises everything that is different and divisive between the two cultures. The Aboriginal man in the sculpture is depicted not as symbolising a conquered people, far from it. He remains triumphant in his dignity and spirit, whereas the European man only surfs the surface of life, desperately searching for something to anchor his feelings of impermanence. And I think that's just an absolutely brilliant, brilliant statement and piece that tells us a lot. This is a bronze sculpture, full-size head, and maybe even a bit bigger, I'm not sure. And it was given to me and lent to me by Joe and Des Tremashi from Gympie, a couple of artists. And this piece and some of this exhibition is dedicated to a gentleman called David Robinson, a very brilliant man. And David was dedicated to Dave Robinson, and he cast it in foundry bronze and with Joe and Des, and I'm so glad and happy that they've lent me this, and it's good to see it in Queensland Parliament, and we'd love to have it back one day. And of course James Nash is the first, he found gold in Queensland in 1867. When Queensland started in 1859, we had a halfpence, and the Governor, George Fergus Bowen, had one halfpenny in the, 7.5 in the Treasury, and of that 7.5, a thief stole the 7p out of the Treasury, and so Queensland in 1859 started on the halfpence. And it's quite unbelievable that in 1867, we struggled along until 1867, and James Nash found gold at Gympie in Queensland, and of course they were bringing out a lot of gold. It was one of the major gold finds of the century. Just huge ribbon gold being dragged out in sugar bag fulls. This piece here is called Feral. This is Greg Shepherd as well, and there's a picture, and Mike might pan in him later. Now, Feral is a piece that's made of barbed wire, and it's 80 metres, and it's high tensile barbed wire. And of course this is unbelievable representation of what it is. I'm going to read it to you. And the artist, it's completed in 2001, and the artist is Gregory Howard Shepherd. And the artist statement reads, Feral immediately confronts us with its body of barbed wire, its all-consuming razor mouth, and a stomach that looks as if it could never be satisfied. We know instinctively, as we do native species, that feral is to be avoided and should not be approached, as no defence mechanism has yet evolved against it. Darwin's theory of evolution is a thesis on how nature and the environment act as a modifying medium on the development of all living things. This evolutionary process, we are told, takes hundreds of thousands of years, and yet feral, like global warming, graphically demonstrates the opposite. It's only in very recent times that man has possessed the ability to breach nature's land masses and sea barriers, bringing with him to new worlds his own native animals and diseases. The list is extensive and the consequences catastrophic. And I think that was global warming, not global warning, and I might just sing you a few bars of my song called Global Warming in a minute. Yeah, I'd like to say thanks to Greg Shepherd for sending this one down. Now this is called The Crown of Sorrow, and it's completed in 2002. It's got wood, barbed wire, steel and acrylic. The sculpture was conceived as a collaborative project between the artist and the Indigenous community. The use of the didgeridoo is an easily recognised image of Aboriginal culture. And to go through a bit of it, you know, as the title suggests, Crown of Sorrow is a statement that depicts the country's colonisation and its effect on its native people. European Christianity at its heart, the crucifixion of Christ bearing a crown of thorns, a mocking abstraction of his life and beliefs. The artist has carried over the image and used barbed wire and nails as steel, common materials used by early settlers to mirror a similar ideology of collective fear and ignorance. The didgeridoo is not a continuous circle, and for many native cultures, until the circle is made whole again, the act of reconciliation and healing cannot take place. Even locating the correct wood for this sculpture was in itself a major exercise. The artist eventually found a slab of native timber that had been grown in Cairns long before the arrival of the Europeans, and it was important that the project that the timber grown in the Jabbergai country. The artist would like to thank Jabbergai Dreaming and the world of Shirley Francine Hollingsworth, both well recognised Aboriginal artists in their own right. Both Shirley and Francine have signed work, and without their permission, enthusiasm, the project wouldn't have been possible. Running out of an Indian hamper that cutting down those trees. Now we're drinking filtered sewerage down in Sydney. Desalinated rivers in Adelaide. You think it went through someone's kidney? Could be drinking someone's DNA. Run it on solar, run it on wind, run it on water, run it on gin. Global warming as we can say. Space from satellite, looking at the planet in a brand new light. The colour blue, the colour blue, the colour blue, shining through. Every year, 100 different species disappear, never return. The human species is not inviting. You never know, you never go up. Tears just came out rolling. Pack up the camp, we're going out west, out where the land and the country is best. Labour and toil will make up the crew. Don't worry about your life, cause your troubles are few. See, the further we go, the longer we travel, the problems we solve. Not failing to excite, watch the romance unfold. Out on that horizon and you're